My guest tonight, Eldon Taylor, has been researching the power of the mind for the past 25 years and is considered to be an expert in the areas of hypnosis and I always have a problem with that word, subliminal communication. For over 10 years, Eldon specialized in criminalistics, where he supervised and conducted investigations and testing to detect deception. Today, Eldon is president and director of Progressive Awareness Research and Company. He has developed and patented the InnerTalk technology, which has been demonstrated by numerous universities to be effective. His website is www.eldontaylor.com, and we're going to get him on the line with us here in just a second, and we'll get this thing going. So let's do that. Let's get Eldon on with us.
Dr. Taylor.
Hi, Dr. Taylor. This is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. I want to welcome you.
Well, hello, sir. How are you?
I am great. And how are you doing?
Excellent. Excellent. Looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, so am I. So am I. I want to thank you for taking time out to be with us, and we are live. So welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. It's indeed my pleasure. I've been looking over your website and your work this last week and love what you do.
Well, thank you so much, and I could say the same for you. I love what you do as well. It's, when we get talking about the mind, wow, just fascinating. And, it's open to all possibilities. But let's start with you first. Let's get a little background and what got you going in this direction. You've done some fantastic work.
I didn't come about it straight on. I think a lot of us are probably in a position that if we look at our lives, they didn't go the way maybe we thought they'd go when we were going to college or we were teenagers. I found myself, I left home when I was young, and I found myself practicing criminalistics. I have to admit that I was a pretty angry young man. I felt that I had reason to be angry, and I was upset with authority, and a very long story. But today I would say I definitely had a chip on my shoulder. And so what I did is I found a socially acceptable way to act out my aggression, and that was through practicing criminalistics. So I spent my days, Michael, typically, running lie detection examinations, supervising an investigation, a surveillance, conducting a forensic hypnosis session. That's what I did. And, along that process, obviously, as I was taking confessions from people, I was constantly questioning myself as to why, someone would come in and confess a crime that would put them away for life. I mean, why did they do these things in the first place? And I heard all kinds of stories. But, the stories were always, they were exaggerated rationalizations for, ill-founded reasoning or impetuous behavior, impulsive activity, and so forth. Nevertheless, I suppose you could say I was a student of the mind, and as I, worked in criminalistics, of course, I took a number of schools and courses that were all about everything from reading body language and handwriting analysis to neuro-linguistic programming, pacing, mirroring, and so forth. And from that sense, I understood how we established rapport and how we pulled out a confession, and many of my peers would have said I was the best. Indeed, I suppose a crown jewel in that part of my career, I was asked to demonstrate psychological stress evaluator, which is a form of no-wire lie detection, in Sandy Gilmore's Take Two live 10 o'clock television show. And the prior week, he'd had a polygraphist on from the Utah State University, and he'd attempted to demonstrate it and been unsuccessful, and of course argued, well, the reason I was unsuccessful at finding deception was because there was no real jeopardy, there was no real crime. Fair enough, but insufficient for me. So when Sandy Gilmore asked me to demonstrate the PSE, I happily agreed and caught him in his lie. And, so you could say there are many people that would say I was very, very good at what I did.
And there's really I mean, it's a gift, isn't it, to be able to do that? Because I'm very interested in this type of work. When you talk about criminality and lie detector tests and the way people give off, I guess, body language when you're talking to them or asking them about something. And so did you actually do the interviews with people?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thousands of them. I'm not exaggerating. And I'm going to tell you this, Michael. When you're when you're in that room and you're getting your lie detection test, there's going to be a piece of equipment that is not a lot more than a very sophisticated form of biofeedback. Now, today it might be functional magnetic resonance imaging, watching your brain. It could be computerized polygraph. Whatever the device is, it is going to be a form of measurement to how your physiology responds. That's what we're talking about, okay? Mm-hmm. Originally, it was something as simple as, galvanic skin response, blood pressure, upper lower pneumo belts, looking at your breathing, and so forth. But now here's the fact, Michael. When you're in that room, the lie detector is not the equipment, it's the examiner. The examiner is your real lie detector. And it's the examiner that brings jeopardy to the room. It puts meaning in the jeopardy that's involved. It's the examiner that makes the test valid or invalid.
I see. That would make a lot of sense. Now, how easy, or I should say, how hard is it? Because I know of a guy who had to take 4 lie detector tests. His story had to do with ETs. I don't want to get out there on you, but and he passed them. And I would assume it's not easy to pass these tests if you're really lying, right?
Well, I have taught, law enforcement people countermeasures techniques for lie detection. One countermeasures technique is really hypnosis. In fact, one of the courses that I took that taught countermeasures was taught by Professor Carl Lepreche, and he put himself in wide-eyed, pardon?
Oh, no, I didn't say anything. I'm listening.
Okay. He put himself in wide-eyed hypnosis, had 2 officers, in a full-body catalepsy, and had 2 officers suspending his head on the back of one chair, his feet on the back of another chair, to demonstrate how hypnosis could control physiology. One of the... Actually, this is a good segue into how I got to doing what I was doing. Okay. You see, as an examiner, one of the major problems that you deal with is what we call inconclusives. And that's just simply, look, we have a guilty person who's going to practice countermeasures. And so they've got a, thumbtack in their shoe. They're going to wiggle during relevant or irrelevant questions so that when you run a zone of comparison test and you ask them, are you living in the state of Washington? And they say, yes, they move so that it distorts that answer, raising the bar by comparison to the answer they give you in irrelevant. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they can be trained in these kinds of countermeasures, and even if you see them as an examiner, you can tell them, sit still, I'm going to have to ask you that again, we're going to have to start the test over, da-da-da-da-da. But as long as they maintain that kind of movement, you end up with an inconclusive, frustrated and an inconclusive. You can also have a person who comes in who, because of the situational stress, is so concerned that you're going to find him guilty that they're almost guilt complex reactors. I don't believe there is a real guilt complex reactor. I'll put that out there in case there's another examiner listening. But the fact of the matter is they're going to respond very often that way. And so zone of comparison tests give you, you know, inconclusive results. You don't have sufficient difference between your relevance and your control or your pre-stress questions to be able to say convincingly this is practicing deception or no deception is indicated. So I had heard that the Los Angeles Police Department, in preparation for the LA Olympics, had tested a subliminal program, an audio subliminal program, where what it was designed to do was cause the inmates to be the terrorists to become dehydrated. So, you know, in a terrorist abduction scenario, many, many hours were spent on the telephone, and so this whole scenario went, you know, they'd play this subliminal, it was masked in the sound of air conditioning or heater, you know, white noise, and they would tell the perpetrators that they were in an infected area. And if they were to see signs of diarrhea, dehydration, they had to be moved. The whole idea was to take control of the situation, okay? I heard that they had literally tested it on cadets in the academy and dehydrated those cadets in 3 days. They had to terminate this experiment. I've never been able to get that confirmed, nor have I been able to find that it was, you know, denied. But it launched me into looking into, okay, what is this? How does this subliminal stuff work? What can it do? And, you know, I made several inquiries. I called people that supposedly made these programs and asked them how they did it. And Michael, you would have thought I was asking for the secret recipe to Coca-Cola. You know, I mean, they would say, you know, we have science, and when I looked at their science, it wasn't science on what they did. It was almost always visual science. It was, you know, the work of other people like Silverstein, or Silverman, I should say, at New York State University. It was work that would have involved some visual presentation, like a tachykoscope, okay? So what I did is I just went out and I bought up a bunch of these programs made by these people, and I sent them off to audio forensic laboratories in Los Angeles, and I said, you know, Anthony, tell me how these folks are doing what they're doing and what's on them. So Anthony came back to me and he said, Eldon, I have taken these things apart and there's nothing on them. Well, I since learned that one of the practices at that time, these people would mask affirmation statements 50 dB beneath the primary carrier. In fact, I received an engineer's affidavit after the company had been approached by an attorney general's office out of Texas. And in that affidavit, he said he masked at 50 dB. Well, now, 50 dB is beneath the theoretical limit of most stereos. So in other words, I mean, it may as well be a whisper said, you know, in China while you're walking down the street in New York. It's simply not going to affect you except maybe whatever placebo effect you might get out of it. So that sent me to the University of Utah, where I searched through the libraries and the databases, med files, Medline, psych abstracts, looking for what I could find. And what I did is I came up with an idea of how we could dichotically mask and deliver information that was there, it was audible, but because of how the brain processes information, it would go unnoticed. It would be like the conversations that go on at a party in the background when you're intently having a conversation with another person. You just simply don't hear them, you know? It would be like the radio turned down on low volume and you're driving down the highway and there's a little bit of wind noise and you've forgotten the radio's on, but you start to hum this song and think, I'll turn the radio on. You reach over and goodness, that's the song that's on. You just picked it up, you see. So I developed this technology, which later became patented and known as Intertalk. But the process, the whole reason was, if I could employ this in my lie detection business, I could minimize inconclusives. You know, it was just a matter of, okay, here's the technology, but now what do I say to these people? All of the research I looked at basically was, you know, it was finding efficacy with with messages like the symbiotic, it's okay to do better than daddy, mommy and I are one. And I didn't think that would work. So I ended up using the 23rd Psalm and a message, the truth shall set you free. Well, I'm going to tell you what, it worked. It worked very, very well. Our inconclusives almost disappeared, and our confession rates increased. And I shared this with other agencies, and first thing you know, we had a number of agencies along the Wasatch Front that were employing it until the county attorney informed us it was probably not a good idea without informed consent. But at that point, Michael, a friend of mine at Utah State Prison came to me and said, Eldon, if this works so well in your lie detection practice, do you think we could use it in the prison to rehabilitate the inmate population? Maybe, even interrupt the recidivity rate. Well, I didn't know. So Lee Liston, this was a fellow at the prison system, and I decided we'd set this study up, but we needed a good stat man, so we got Dr. Charles McCusker involved, and we used the very latest, greatest psychometrics, and computer delivered those, the MMPI, to determine what we might put on a program for this inmate population that would interrupt recidivity rates, would lower hostility and aggression, et cetera, and so forth. There was the turn in my career, Michael, because when we ran the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, for those of you who are not familiar with that particular test, it's the most extensive form of personality inventory. We didn't find anything we didn't know. We had high scores in self-alienation, high scores in social alienation. And so what we had was an inmate who had low self-esteem who compensated for that simply by, if I'm not any good, you're not any good, by acting it out against society. When, however, we sat and talked to him, I learned something that was my own epiphany. These inmates essentially failed to take responsibility for their activity. They all had stories, it's not my fault, all but for the grace of God, there go you. My daddy was an alcoholic, my mommy was a prostitute, the neighbor boy mainlined me when I was 12 years old. I mean, look, given that set of circumstances, what would you do? Hey, he did this to me, so I retaliated. I mean, he dissed me, wouldn't you do the same thing? Yeah. I mean, it was always a rationalization, a justification for the behavior. There was no such thing as taking responsibility. It was always a matter of displacing the responsibility by way of blame. And when we saw that pattern, it became clear to me that the only way we were going to interrupt recidivity rates, and listen, prison systems, you probably already know this. I've seen some of the posts that you have on your website, so I'm sure you don't. But prison systems generally tend to help our criminal environment, our inmate population, become better criminals.
Yeah.
They don't work as we would like them to. And so if we could really interrupt the recidivity rate, if we could somehow, facilitate returning an inmate population to the general population as rehabilitated individuals, well, that would be a big deal. Now, I'm going to tell you, I wasn't at that time. I'm probably still not what we think of as a bleeding heart. I didn't have really high hopes that this would work. But again, as we talked to these inmates, thought, how can I undo that? I mean, what kind of messages? And we finally settled on 3. I forgive myself, I forgive all others, I am forgiven. And then we put some strong self-esteem messages in as well. Now, the whole idea behind the forgiveness, and you can imagine that there was, this was back in the early 80s, there was, some feet dragging about that because, look, if the inmate forgives himself, isn't he just going to go do it again? But no, see, the whole idea was this. The only way you're going to undo blame is to prevent that inmate from castigating someone else and making them responsible for his actions, his or her actions. And the only way you can do that is through forgiveness. So we put this program together, And indeed, we saw hostility and aggression reduced dramatically pre and post test. In fact, the data was so robust, Michael, that the Utah State Prison installed voluntary libraries throughout, from the minimum security 288 facility, youth offenders facility, where we conducted this study, by the way, with participants' full awareness of what the study was. They all volunteered. It was a double blind, the first of its kind in a prison. We had our placebo group, we had a control group, and we had the experimental group. So we really had hard data that we could compare. That data was so robust, the prison system installed it throughout, as I say, from youth offenders to maximum security. It was cloned out to other prison systems, and indeed, a couple of months ago, I was doing a show with a radio host, and when I mentioned this, because she'd asked me, she said, yeah, I was at Chowchilla at the time when we adopted it and took it in there as well. This was a female facility in California. So, but here's the epiphany. I discovered at that very moment, that I wasn't any different than that inmate, except that I had found the socially acceptable way to act out my hostility and aggression. I had, and I don't say this with any. I say this, I guess, with shame. I was looking for another way, but I could look on some of the things I had done and some of the ways perhaps I had, intentionally hurt someone, cuffing them, and realize that, there's a very fine line between this person and myself. I have just simply found a way to act out my anger. It was important to me that I change that then. And so I basically made a very conscious decision that I'm going to learn everything I can learn about the mind, how we're programmed, not just this criminal aspect of it, but I'm going to find every way I can to turn my life around, to be fully self-responsible, to undo this blame stuff, and to live my life at a higher level. And that's how I got to where I am and doing what I'm doing, Michael.
Well, that is fascinating. And now I've got a question about this thing with the prisoners. Now, okay, so you're able to have them forgive themselves and maybe take responsibility for their own actions. But now what I wonder is, once they get out, and if they start going around the same old people and the same old places, will that trigger their mind back to their deviant ways?
Well, we don't live in a vacuum. The bottom line is you concede a whole new way of thinking. We have this stream of consciousness. That's what William James called it. It's our self-talk, how we talk to ourselves. And it sets up our expectations. And the research shows, without a doubt, our expectations are confirmed every day. We sometimes call that the Pygmalion factor or the expectation factor. But the hard data is just simply, if you expect that the world sucks, and then you die, well, you make that a life-fulfilling prophecy. You live accordingly. We can see a whole new, stream of consciousness. We think of it as cognitive engineering, and so we can begin, this process of implanting a stream, a series of statements. I am confident. I like myself. I'm peaceful. Life is wonderful. I'm grateful. All those things that we know tie into building self-esteem, to building a responsible citizen, and so forth. But once you have that stream of consciousness going, you've primed it like you prime the old well pumps or the old, fuel pumps. Once you have that going, like I say, you don't live in a vacuum. If you put yourself back in the sewer, you're going to wear some of the smell. And depending on how long you stay down there, it most definitely can influence you. People sometimes ask me, how long do I have to use this program before I don't have to use it again? And, the answer to that comes down to who you live with, the amount of stimulation that's around you, the environment you've chosen. I mean, in a very real sense, in my book Choices and Illusions, where I flesh all this out, together with, the whole unconscious process that we haven't touched on yet, I tell a story about, a chicken and an eagle, and I think it's very illustrative, so let me share it with you if I can,
Okay.
Michael.
Sure.
This is a story about an eagle, we'll call it Gina, that falls from her nest at a very young age, and in fact, she's still got pin feathers, and she pulls herself along until she's literally exhausted, and along comes a old hen, and this hen adopts her and brings her into the chicken coop and raises her. Well, the eagle raised in the chicken coop with the chickens, of course, is imprinted by them. That's the word in psychology, and the next thing you know, we have this eagle behaving just like a chicken, Well, one day there's a male eagle, and, he's kind of flying by, and he happens to see this beautiful eagle down in the chicken yard, and decides he couldn't find out what she's doing down there. Swooped down into the chicken yard. As he approaches, his shadow is picked up, and of course the chickens all run to the chicken house, and so does our female eagle. Well, the male eagle's persistent. He's going to hang around. He's going to watch, and he's going to get his opportunity. Well, he watches this female eagle, she digs these great deep holes, and these chickens all get down in it, and she's not really good at laying eggs, but like most of us in real life, she is good at doing some things, and so she's accepted for what she does do well, and the others just kind of overlooked. And she feels like she fits in. And the eagle watching this just can't imagine how this eagle, this beautiful eagle, became a chicken. But the day comes when he sees that he can cut her off before she could ever get to the chicken yard, and he swoops down, bang, he's got her cut off, all the other chickens in the chicken house. And he says to her, he says, what are you doing in this chicken yard? And she says, what do you mean? He says, well, you're an eagle. Can't you see that? I mean, look at me, look at you. You belong in the air. I mean, let me tell you the things I have seen, what you can do. And as he told her, that just frightened her more. So she's there trembling. But she was a smart eagle. So she said to him, you really think I'm an eagle? And he said, of course. Well, then you're not going to hurt me. And he said, well, no, I'm not going to hurt you. And she said, well, I could believe that maybe if you weren't blocking my way from escape, standing there, just looking like you could hurt me any minute. And he said, well, here, I'll step out of the way. And as he steps away, into the chicken house she goes, where she tells all the chickens how she outsmarted this eagle. And the chickens applaud her, and the old rooster tells her how great she is and how smart she is and how wise she was not to listen to that eagle. Now, if you think about the human condition, many of us live in an environment where we're just told, no, you can't do that. You're not smart enough to do that. You're just, maybe it's in your genes. You're just fat. Get accustomed to it. You're not pretty enough. Well, you're not handsome enough. You're just not. And all this no-don't stuff we hear every day. We tune into the television. And I'm going to tell you, we watch commercials, and there's one common, universal, subliminal message in every single commercial, and that's you're deficient. You're not good enough. Because if you weren't deficient, you wouldn't have any use for their product. So your hair is not right. You need this hair color. Your skin's not right. You need this lotion. You don't look as good as you could. You should dress this way. You could have the girls if you had this kind of a car. And on and on and on and on. We are sold that we are deficient repeatedly. We go to school, and as Robert Bly says, we're born into the world all very innocent. We're so innocent that we explore everything. We may even pick up those little round brown things in our diapers and test them out for how they taste. There is no such thing as a taboo. We're just exploring along, and if we need something, we kind of cry out, and, we get milk, we get, warm covers, everything that we think we need, we get. And then one day we don't. One day our cry leads to discipline.
Yeah.
One day we're in school and somebody says to us, the teacher says, "Oh, Johnny, you shouldn't show your anger. It's not good to be angry. Oh, Johnny, you shouldn't behave that way. That's kind of jealous and petty, Johnny. Oh, Johnny, you should never do this." And we start hearing all the defects that we have, and we start hiding them away. As Bly says in his marvelous little book, a little book on the human shadow, we start sticking them in this imaginary long bag that we're going to carry with us all of our life, like a duffel bag. Down here, we just start sticking part of ourselves in it. We're going to hide it away. We're going to hide it away so we can be accepted, because it's critical that we are accepted. If we're not accepted, we're rejected. We're herd animals. We don't want to live alone. We want to be accepted. When we're laughed at for something that we do, we stop doing it. When we're criticized or ridiculed, we change the way we behave. I had a gentleman who was in a situation where he was about to have his marriage come undone. He was having problems in work, and it was all because he'd been labeled as a stoic that just didn't have a sense of humor. He just didn't feel. He had some kind of a detachment disorder, an emotional detachment disorder. And what it came down to, the bottom line was, he did have a sense of humor. He just didn't laugh. And the reason was, when he was young, he had laughed, and he had been ridiculed for his crooked smile and his funny laugh, and they had made such fun of him that unconsciously he made the decision he was never laughing again. Now, he didn't. It became a defense strategy. It became an unconscious process that prevented him from laughing. And in his adult life, he'd long forgotten about that scenario, but it still controlled him. So he arrested his response to funny jokes. And the word got out that, this guy would spoil any party. Yeah. Don't invite him, you see. So we have all these things that we put in this long bag, and then we drag this long bag along with us. We pretend to be something else. Listen, think about this. I don't know anybody that has not experienced the difference that I'm going to describe, male or female. For me, and if you're a female, make it work for you. If I've got a three-piece suit and a tie on, I'm on a university campus, I behave differently than if I have my jeans and my tennis shoes or my running shoes and I'm getting ready to run. Or I live in Washington State, over on the eastern end. I've got a little ranch. If I put my chaps and my boots on and head out to the horses, my behavior changes still again. Okay? I have a friend who's a radio talk show host and a psychotherapist and a Harley lover. And I guarantee you, when she puts her chaps on and straddles that Harley, she isn't at all the same person that she is in her office with a client.
Well said.
You might ask yourself, what causes us to be so chameleon-like? Why is it that we feel we have to behave in a certain way according to how we're dressed? Have we really lost so much of ourselves that we can just change the clothes we have on and suddenly we're somebody else? And if you don't think that that's a true statement, you're wrong. Look, hard research shows this. If I give you a white jacket to wear and tell you it's a doctor's jacket, your concentration and memory will be much keener than if I give you a white jacket and tell you it's a painter's jacket. You understand? That's the same white jacket. It's just your expectation. This is a result of hard studies. Lots of these kinds of studies have been done. Listen, our current president, President Obama, in this last presidential election, put together what people in behavioral science think of as the dream team. What was a dream team? Well, what he did is he simply got a hold of Craig Fox, a psychologist involved in neuromarketing, and Fox put together the brightest minds in the field today in what we might call, what Cialdini has called, and Cialdini himself was one of those minds, compliance principles. If I can get you to do this, I know you'll do that. If I say this, in probability, you'll respond this way. If I give you the white jacket and tell you it's a doctor's jacket or the painter's jacket, you see, all this research, and there's a plethora of research. It's unbelievable what we know about how to manipulate a human being today. Listen, Michael, I know from your paper, your page, that you're conservative. If I were to give someone a scale to measure whether they were conservative or they were liberal, and I set on the table, on the desk where they were to take that, a jar of hand sanitizer, it will skew them to the conservative side. And if I then begin to ask them why they've answered more conservative than they've ever been in their life, they'll make up a reason for that. They will confabulate the story to justify, and that will make them even more conservative. Well, vice versa is true. And these kinds of things are done every day. Sometimes they're done through the mail. Here comes that, piece of mail that says you're the registered Democrat or you're the registered Republican, or, we're appealing to you on behalf of so-and-so. You must sincerely, disagree with this policy or that policy. And then everything is framed, and often by definition, to march you down Primrose Path. Listen, if you can control the definition, you can control the argument. The fact of the matter is, if you, and you know this, I'm sure, if you think back to Janet Napolitano's National Security Domestic Extremism Dictionary that was leaked, that defined pro-life and returning vets and, generally aimed at conservative values as being terrorist risks, and went out to all the law enforcement agencies and fortunately got called back because it was discovered by the press. What had they done but marginalize these people by simply putting them in a group that, for all intent and purposes, we see in a very negative way? It's unbelievable how easy this works. I think most people remember Susan Boyle, the UK singer,
this
disheveled housekeeper that came on, and the judges laughed and the audience sneered, and then she opened her mouth and the most mellifluous sound came out.
Oh, yeah.
And you got to ask, wait a minute, what makes us think that a singer should look a certain way? Why on earth were we scoffing? Hey, what's the deal here?
That's very
But you see,
true.
there's so much unconscious programming, and we are so easily manipulated that when you ask the question, I have to say, we don't live in a vacuum. And the net result of that is you have to be in charge. You have to take charge of your mind. You have to take charge of the information that you allow in your mind. I mean, we get so much soundbite stuff. Look, I know you're going to love this one, but one of the things I do, obviously, is look at how this material, pollutes the minds of people today. And I would use a stronger word, but we'll just stay with that one for a moment.
Okay.
So one day I'm watching two networks. One is a very conservative network, and the other is a very, well, I'll just tell you, I like your show and I like what you do. So on one I'm watching Fox, and on the other one I'm watching MSNBC, okay? Now, we've got the same poll going on these two networks. I'll let you figure out which one's which, okay?
Okay.
On one network, we have a poll. Should poor taxpayers be forced to pay for private schools, work two jobs because our public schooling system doesn't work? On the other network, we have the poll goes this way. Should poor taxpayers be forced to pay for rich kids to go to private schools? Now, the issue is all about school vouchers. The problem is, if I'm conservative, I'm likely going to be tuned to that conservative network, and I'm going to say, of course, you know, poor taxpayers shouldn't be forced to work 2 jobs in order to pay for private schools because the public school system sucks. If I'm liberal, I'm going to go, of course, those rich kids, those fat cats, of course not. See? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reason from that soundbite. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to argue with my neighbors and my friends, and you can gather around the water fountain. School vouchers are evil. School vouchers are good. What I'm not going to do is go to the library or Google school vouchers. Who uses them? Where does the money come from? How do they impact public education? How do they impact the students? I'm not going to get the facts. Instead, I'm going to reason from the soundbite. Now, if that's where I am, if that's what I'm doing, if that's how I'm living an unattended life. The fact of the matter is, you know, John Milton said in his wonderful book, Paradise Lost, the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. And you are simply what you think. So
I totally
I hope
agree.
that answers your question. Probably a little long.
Oh no, I've loved it. I mean, I love where you're going with all this, because I have a big interest in how people's minds are controlled, because, you know, in doing the business I'm in here with radio, I deal with a lot of different people, and I have had those who I would say either they bumped their head one too many times or they're under some kind of mind control. And I mean, they watch stuff, and like you said, they let the sound bite decide for them. They don't do the research. Rather, they say, well, Glenn Beck said this, so that's what it is. Or you know, the president said this, so that's what it is. And they don't go and do their research on it. And that's really a form of mind control, isn't it? When they're letting...
It is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is, you know, and once again, if you can control the definition, you'll control the argument. And these things don't happen by accident. They're very carefully scripted. You know, in the last presidential election, and I don't mean to be, you know, just zeroing in there, because I'll take you to the Bush campaign here in a minute. But in the last presidential election, the scripting for the canvas people was very carefully written. Every single word by this dream team of social psychologists who spend their time totally understanding what we can do to cause people to behave in ways that they believe they're choosing. You know, let's digress for a second. Let's kind of look at propaganda. Propaganda, for all intent and purposes, the modern propaganda as we know it, was Edward Bernays' creation. Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew. When he looked at his Uncle Siggy's work, instead of thinking about how he could facilitate improving the human condition, he looked at how we could control the human condition. In his book, Propaganda, he very openly says that it's incumbent upon the elite to control the masses by means of giving them sufficient misinformation that, for all intent and purposes, the important decisions could be carried out for their betterment, which they would disagree with otherwise. So Bernays himself believed that it was the obligation of the ruling elite to control the information the masses dealt with. And, you know, and Bernays was involved in overthrowing the Guatemala's government in support of the United Fruits. And, you know, he got the U.S. government behind that. Bernays held the Golden Lights Jubilee, and there he named or credited Thomas Edison with inventing the light bulb. And to this day, you ask most school teachers who invented the light bulb, they'll tell you Thomas Edison, and that's totally false. A fellow by the name of Joseph Swan did. Bernays also claimed to be involved in the creation of Israel. And he was involved with the tobacco industry, ivory soap, fluoridation of water, and the marketing of World War I. He was very close with Woodrow Wilson. He was also hired by George Creel and his commission, like I say, to market World War I. In the first Gulf War, you know, stories were manufactured about babies being pulled from incubators. They were just flat manufactured. Well, that's a throwback on a story that was manufactured in World War I about Germans bayoneting, you know, young babies in nurseries, etc. So the bottom line is, Bernays thought, how is it we can get people to do what it is that we want them to do and have them believe that they're doing it because they decided to do it. It's their choice. You know, it's the right thing to do. How do we do that? Well, one of the things that he developed is something we call scientific marketing. Now, scientific marketing was simply, you know, let's flash back to our conversation of polygraph. You know, what we're going to do is we're going to look at your blood pressure, maybe your galvanic skin response, perspiration, conductivity in your palms or your fingertips, some physiological measure, and we're going to, you know, play jingles to you. We're going to show you different products. We're going to stimulate you visually or auditorially, and maybe even kinesthetically. And then we're going to see how you respond. And those things that arouse you, that's what we want to really pay attention to, because we know that we need arousal in order to gain your attention and seize a place in short-term memory. And if we can get enough arousal, we can even slide it by into long-term memory. And, you know, you don't have to understand the nature of this arousal or why this arousal. As long as we can get the arousal, we can make certain predictions. Let me stop right there and give you one such, and then I'll come back and advance this, okay?
Okay.
One study shows us that if we take in this particular study, an attractive psychology student, a young, beautiful psychology student, conducted the series, the study, carried it out herself. She approached people on a bench in a park, and she would tell them that she is conducting a survey, and this is graduate work for her PhD, and ask them if they'd answer a few questions, and then thank them and give them a business card. Okay? Mm-hmm. She also approached men that were crossing a dangerous bridge, a suspension bridge. It was rocking back and forth. She'd catch them before they exited the bridge, tell them the same thing, go through the same routine. Okay? Now, she'd give them their business card. Almost without fail, those on the bridge would later call her and ask her for a date. Those on the park bench failed to do so. Now, the takeaway here is this. Those on the bridge found her attractive, not because she was more attractive than those that sat on the park bench, but because their level of arousal was already high from crossing this dangerous bridge. They paired that arousal with her, and that became the stimulus response that they became conscious of. Do you understand that?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So now let's come back. If we can get this arousal, then we know how we can begin to market. So this was the early stage of scientific marketing. Today, that science is known as neuromarketing. And functional magnetic resonance imaging is used a great deal to evaluate just exactly how we respond. In a study, now I think about 3 years old, by way of example, conducted in the United Kingdom, we discovered that smokers, when shown the Surgeon General's warning on a pack of cigarettes, the reward centers in the brain became excited. To use the words of PET or MRI people, they lit up. indicating the smoker wanted to smoke more. So what was the answer then? Well, let's put this warning in larger letters and on both sides of the pack. So, in other words, by utilizing functional magnetic resonance imaging, we now know how the brain will respond, what excites you, what areas of the brain will respond. We also know this, and this should get everybody's attention. Years ago, in the 50s, a fellow by the name of Benjamin Libet, a researcher by the name of Benjamin Libet, utilizing multicranial EEG, watched what we call a P300 wave, a cortical evoked potential occur before a conscious act, before a conscious decision. And he theorized, I'm seeing this from an area of the unconscious. This would presuppose that the unconscious is telling the conscious what to do. So that spawned a great deal of conversation about free will and determinism. And I'm sure, as you know, there are many scientists today that would tell you there's no such thing as free will. We don't think about what we're going to think until what we're going to think is being thought. You know, free will is an illusion. You know, Krishnamurti said choice is an illusion. Do we do this or do we do that? Well, that arises out of confusion. When we know what to do, there is no choice, you see. Well, bottom line is this. Today, with fMRI, a MRI technician watching your brain lifetime while you make a decision will know 6 to 10 seconds before you know what you're going to decide.
Wow.
You get that?
Yeah.
6 to 10 seconds before you know what you're going to do, Michael. The MRI tech has written down what you're going to choose. Okay? Now hold it. Hold it a minute. Wait. You know, I have a friend in Hilo, Hawaii. He's a neurosurgeon, Dr. John Turney, and he goes by Jack. And Jack says to me, Eldon, there's no such thing as free will. The fact of the matter is the information coming from the unconscious to the conscious is so in advance that there isn't even this millisecond any longer that, you know, that you could interrupt it if you had the opportunity to do so. And in that sense, he's right. But Michael, on a more positive sense, now coming back over to when you said some of these people are just programmed, no kidding, put, you know, about 3 explanation points behind that, because the information that I have taken in, that I have placed in my unconscious, it kind of becomes the calculator. It becomes the software program. And, you know, the old software programmers, they had a term. It was called GIGO. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay? Well, listen, if you've got ants running around, and I think of ants as automatic negative thoughts, you've obviously been programmed with GIGO. But if you're also doing your reasoning from sound bites, if you have not done the independent investigation, if you have not worked diligently to monitor your thoughts, to be mindful about what you're thinking, to ask yourself, well, where is that coming from? To pay attention to these things, not judgmentally, because that can shut them down, but to just listen to that stream of consciousness and to monitor it, and then to take proactive steps to, you know, choose what you're going to put in your unconscious. You are unconscious because it's your unconscious that's doing your thinking for you. And the only chance you have to exercise free will is to choose what you put into your mind. So if you sit down to TV or, you know, you go to your movies, and your movies are all about the desensitization of the threshold of arousal. And you're not going to hear that from too many folks, but let me flesh that out for you.
Okay.
Today we hear a lot about violence, and everybody wants to point at guns. You know, you can have somebody with a knife that stabs several people, a kitchen knife, and we're not going to suddenly ban kitchen knives. But we have a lot of people aimed at guns, and they're aimed at guns because of all the violence. And you have to say, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Well, some of us don't think it makes too much sense. And the reason for that is this. When you look at history, you see that there was a time students took their guns to school. And after seventh period, maybe, or in seventh period, their coach would take them out and teach them to shoot. So you'd take your .22 rifle to school, you put it in your locker. Nobody ever got shot. What's happened, what's changed is this. In order for entertainment to have any value, it has to be exciting. Remember, we're right back to that again. It has to arouse you.
Yeah.
If it's arousing you, you're not bored. If it's not arousing you, you're bored. So, okay, what we do is, instead of Marilyn Monroe's skirt being blown up by a vent in the sidewalk, and you get to see a little leg, and you think, wow, isn't that titillating, circa 1950, you get to watch live sex on primetime television. Oh, maybe you don't see, forgive me, maybe you don't see the genitals or penetration, but you see almost everything else. And you don't have to go far to get the very explicit. It's everywhere on the internet, and and so forth. Okay. In other words, the amount of sex today has been compounded exponentially over what it was 40, 50 years ago. So is the amount of violence. I mean, look, take Sylvester Stallone. I'm not picking on him. I happen to like him, but this is just, by way of an example. In First Blood, the number of bad guys killed by Rambo with his shirt on was 1. The number of bad guys killed by Rambo, no matter how he was attired, was 1. The number of good guys killed by Rambo was 0. The total number of people killed then were 1. And that first person was killed at 29 minutes and 31 seconds. Now, please bear with me. That was in 1982. In 1985, Rambo First Blood Part 2. Number of bad guys killed by Rambo with his shirt on, 12. Number of bad guys killed by Rambo with his shirt off, 46. Number of bad guys killed totally, 58. Number of good guys killed, 1. Total number killed, 69. First person killed, number of people killed per minute, 0.72. First person that was killed was at 1 minute, 18 seconds into the movie. All right, Rambo 3. I'm just going to jump real quick now.
Okay.
Instead of 69, we had 132 killed, 1988. By 2008, Rambo 4, we whacked 236 folks. Number of people killed per minute, 2.59. 2.59 per minute. Now, this is just a single shot down through the middle at what's gone on in the entertainment industry when it comes to the amount of violence that we see nowadays. And the more violence we see, the more desensitized we become to it.
Absolutely.
So we have to have more and more. So we have virtual killing machines in computer games today, or in your local, the military.
Yeah.
Trains pilots on virtual flying machines.
Yeah.
When you walk into an arcade today and you see 40, 50 games being played by young teenagers, all holding guns, small guns, handguns, rifles, etc., and shooting all the bad guys, you're not too far away from how we train pilots to fly airplanes. So the fact of the matter is we have this desensitization going on, and virtual reality has compounded that. You can take young people today, young man, and case in point, who was interviewed by a psychologist in New York, played a game called RuneScape. It's multiplayer game, MMORPG as it's called, online game where you interact with other people. You take on, your own identity, and that becomes your avatar, and you go out and you get things. You can even rob people. You can kill people. You can steal their things, bargain them, or take them. This young man was asked about his pets. How many pets do you have? And he said, "Oh, I have 3. "Oh, you have 3? What have you got?" "Well, I've got a dog and a cat and a horse." "You have a horse?" "Yeah, and I love it." "You live in New York in an apartment and you have a horse?" "Yeah." "Well, what's the horse's name?" And the boy went on and explained and described and how much he loved it, and da-da-da-da. And the horse, turns out, is in the game RuneScape. But here's the problem. He didn't have the differentiated ability to distinguish between that virtual pet and his real pets. Now, if you turn around and you look at all these shooter games and you look at all this desensitization with regard to our threshold of arousal with violence, what you see is we've actually created people. We have created an environment where it's okay to get even. I don't get even, I get evener. And I'm practiced, and I know how to do it. And I'm going to get those bullies. I'm going to get that boss, or I'm going to. And that's societal in its nature. It has nothing to do with the nature of the weapon. It has everything to do with what we've done in creating the mind space for the people.
Incredible.
Society.
Doctor, we've got to take a break here. When we come back, I want to pick up on this because there's several places we can go with this. And I suggest you go over there and check it out after tonight's show, or even now if you want. A lot of great stuff there. He has done some fantastic work. I want to give you a couple examples of just what he's talking about. For instance, and I want to ask you about this as well, Dr. Taylor, is this recent shooting and how they made sure that they made it clear that it was yelled, "The revolution has begun." Now, is that not trying to program people to think that everyone who has said we need a revolution in this country is now a bad person who's going to shoot everybody?
The answer to that is yes. I mean, whether it was intentionally done or it's an unintentional fact, it's branding that's going on. And the branding says anyone and everyone that has ever said we need a revolution is suddenly lumped into that category as dangerous. And of course, if you follow that story, the story is being connected with other stories, which have already been labeled in a negative sense. And so we get even a bigger picture of it. And now we're really looking at potential terrorists, aren't we? Yeah. I mean, isn't that the way this story is fleshing itself out? The Nevada rancher, that's where these people first got their visibility. Those are that's the footage that we're seeing everywhere of the male shooter. So, I mean, the short answer is absolutely.
Yeah, and then I look at Hillary Clinton, and, I know that they're setting her up to be our next president. They're going to pull that the first woman kind of thing. And what they're doing is to make everybody forget about any of the scandals and things that she's been involved with. They bring out Monica Lewinsky into the news, and right away it's like, oh, that poor woman, what she had to deal with for her husband cheating on her, and like they're more or less pulling the sympathy out of people, is what I see.
Well, and not only that, they're making it old news. They're getting it out well in advance of the campaign. So yeah, I know that. I've heard that before. It'll be like Reverend Wright. Yeah, I know that. I've heard that before. What are you getting on? Now, you're going to see something else happen, and this too is planned, where we have a lot of racial issues attached to President Obama. We'll have a lot of sexist issues attached to Hillary Clinton.
Very
so if you dare speak against the president, well, my goodness, you could be racist, couldn't you?
Right.
And if you dare speak against Hillary Clinton, well, you're just a sexist. That's what you are. Okay?
Yeah.
So without a doubt, you will see both of those angles played in this next election cycle.
Right.
Presidential election cycle.
And I would guess that after they've used up Obama and then used up Hillary Clinton as the first black president, the first woman president, and next we'll have, and I'm not picking on anybody, I'm simply saying next they'll use the first gay president, and they're going to keep going with
perhaps
this.
or perhaps a Hispanic. I mean, the bottom line comes down to this: what you want in a candidate is you want that person that everybody is comfortable with, and they present themselves as a straight up individual, but they have to have something else going for them, something else besides money. And in this day and age, gender or race are two cards pretty hard to trump. And I think what you're going to see, what we're going to find as the cards are laid down over the next 8 to 10 years, we're going to find that it's the minorities that are going to be at the front of the tickets.
Yeah.
Both sides, by the way.
Oh, I agree. Well, I look at both sides as really being on the same team. And, it's behind closed doors. It's I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And it's kind of like professional wrestling. When they're in the cameras are on and they're in the ring, it's, scratching and punching. But, behind the scenes, I think they do more for each other than they lead on.
I couldn't concur more. I think if you've got a difference at all, it's in your sponsors. I like your metaphor, your wrestlers. They have different sponsors, and the sponsors can put some real pressure on who gets to win the bout, if you will. And sometimes, they don't always have the same sponsors. You're not going to find labor unions sponsoring your Republican candidate. And you typically aren't going to find, big oil money, energy exploration money sponsoring your Democratic candidate, just by way of example. So you have sponsors. The problem with our system today is it is severely broken, and that's because it's controlled by money.
Yeah, I agree. Now, when we talk about this form of mind control, how does all this play out in cyberspace? Because what I've been trying to figure out for a long time is, growing up, I don't remember hearing about people running in houses and restaurants and shooting the places up. And when kids had a disagreement, they had a little fist fight in the park. And now things have really changed. I mean, and I've talked to young men who are enlisting in the military, and I tell them, aren't you scared? And no, I'm looking forward to this. I want to see some action. And I'm thinking, really? And that's where the conditioning and the training of the video games and such come from. But I wonder,
absolutely,
how does all this play in cyberspace? Because I deal with trolls. I work with iPredator.co, and what we do is help people who have problems with internet trolls or cyber stalkers and things like that. And what I notice with some of these people is they're almost like they're whoever they want to be. They get online, they wouldn't say these things to you in person, but on the internet, they're just a total different person.
Well, flashback to the MMORPG, okay? So we start, young children start playing multiple online games with a multiple variety of people of any age, a range of age. You could have a 7-year-old and a 30-year-old, and they meet as avatars, equals in a game, And depending on how they play the game, you may not be able to detect their age. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they're able to disguise themselves completely. They're able not just to disguise themselves. In many of the games, they can choose how they disguise themselves. You know, they can act out a fantasy and the male can be a female or vice versa. Or they can be the big tough guy, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, bodybuilder with all the armor and so forth. So they have the opportunity to create this avatar. Now, the avatar acts the way they might fantasize about an avatar acting. They might fantasize about themselves acting. You know, we have this mechanism we call sublimation because we have all kinds of drives. Anyone that's ever studied psychology walks away and remembers the 4 basic drives because they're typically called the 4 F's: fight, flight, feeding, and fornication. And those basic drives underlie the human condition. I think there's a 5th one today. It's more, but that's another conversation. The bottom line is your desire maybe sexually towards someone finds a acceptable way to be acted out through some relationship. Perhaps it's marriage, some socially acceptable relationship. Otherwise, you become a sexual predator, and you're branded as that, or, you know, and so on and so forth. So for the average person, for the normal person, we find ways to sublimate primitive drives. But with the avatar, I don't have to sublimate anything. I can act it all out. Whatever my wildest fantasies might have been, I can carry that out. So, you know, go ahead and make my day. You know, those one-liners become how people begin to behave very often. All right, now, I'm behaving that way, and so in a sense, that avatar, that part of me that you see on the screen may well be a sociopath. Absolutely no conscience about what they're doing. Doesn't see the other avatar they're playing against, the other person they're communicating with, as necessarily even real. Flashback to that 12-year-old and his pony in RuneScape. So there is this desensitized ability to interact, and there is no level of inhibition. Now, if you want to add to your trolls right now, a concern that, you know, should be very, very real, is the Turing test was just defeated this past Monday. And that means artificial intelligence can now pose as a human being, and you're unable to tell that it's artificial intelligence. Well, now programs can be written, will be written, you can count on it, that will go out on the internet like bulk email. And it will be, instead of a live human being, it will be artificial intelligence. Instead of having a few human beings, maybe 10,000 on a given day, you could have 100 million artificial intelligence units engaging with real people, all for less than honorable reasons, all for nefarious purposes, if you will.
Kind of like we have now when we call, like, say, a utility company or a cable company, and they have that woman who will say, "Hi, how can I help you?" Ha 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 ha. You know, and she tries to interact with you. I mean, it's annoying,
right? Except that, hey, you there? I can detect it. Right. You know, this new software, you can't detect it. I mean, the Turing test was based on this. Look, if you had a real person and a computer, and you could ask these two, you know, questions, you could interrogate the two of them. And you had a certain period of time to interrogate it, maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then you had to decide which one was real and which one was virtual, which one was the computer. If the computer failed you, if you were unable to determine the computer, let me say that differently. If the computer fooled you 30% of the time or more, then it defeated the Turing test. Now, nothing has ever been able to do that, but this program that they just tested did it 33% of the time. So 1/3 of the time, the individuals, qualified individuals who knew that one of these two programs was artificial intelligence were fooled and called it the real person, and the real person they called artificial. Wow. Well, here we've got educated people that are actually dealing with a scenario where they know the odds are 50-50. One of these is artificial intelligence. Imagine now you just got your average person out there, and they're on the internet, and they're engaged by an AI program that has a very real conversation with them, that can answer their questions in a very real way, that is a thinking, adapting form of intelligence. Imagine the scams that can be run then.
That is scary, because dealing with real live trolls is enough. Imagine these programs, my God.
Yeah. And again, you come back to look. What is the safeguard that every human being has? Well, you know, look, you can go out and hire companies to help you, and maybe you should. But on top of that, you have to become mindful. You have to disengage from this. Today we call it System 1 and System 2 thinking. You know, System 1 thinking is just quick work, quick work, quick work. System 2 is I'm actually contemplating what it is that I'm going to do. I'm considering the ramifications. I'm thinking about, you know, the alternatives, potential. And if you think about how many decisions that we make in a day where we actually stop to think about it, then you quickly understand that, hey, not only is it coming from the unconscious, it's so quick whir that we're basically automatons. We're not stopping to think about it. And that's what I'm trying to encourage. In fact, my book, Mind Programming, I go through, you know, we talk about arousal. People have often said to me, why would a liquor ad put a woman in that bottle appearing to give oral sex to some unidentified, and I'll leave it at that. Okay. And the reason is simply this. Remember arousal. One of the things that I put in the book, Mind Programming, is an actual training manual from a advertising agency that shows how they built an ad and, you know, rendered it from a painting, an initial idea, into a photograph with a real model, with a glass of so-called ice cubes. All of this for the purpose of feeding certain arousal mechanisms that give rise to our identifying that liquor as being exciting. Okay? And of course, you know, there are some really, I mean, I put the transparencies right in the book. There's another ad that talks about colors and why all the colors are used and how we respond to the colors. And then, and on and on and on. I mean, the bottom line is this. If you're a waitress out there, I'm going to tell you what. Wear red tomorrow when you go to work, because research shows you're going to get a larger tip. You know? If you have a product that you want to offer someone and there's an alternative, the one you want to sell, you want that to be the first option, because we're more likely to choose our first option than we are the second. Thinking about giving motivates people to help others. So if you want to increase the donations that you might receive, tell a story about the advantage of somebody that gave, that saved someone, and then show a credit card. Because just having a picture of a credit card, whether or not the user or the person donating has a credit card or not, will encourage that they will give more statistically if you just have that there. what a person does may well depend on what their hands are doing. We know that, there are certain numbers that you're likely to choose and certain numbers that... Go ahead.
Oh no, I think that was just an interference, a click or something.
Oh, okay. And I could go on, Michael. The bottom line is this. We can all be manipulated, and billions of dollars have been spent to learn how to plumb the depths of our unconscious, so we are guided to make choices that aren't really our own choices. And the only way we can prevent ourselves from doing that is to become mindful about it. I told you in the last before the break that I didn't want to just pick on President Obama, because this is both sides, and you're right, both sides seem to respond to, except for the difference of their sponsors, a plan, and that plan seems to just keep acting itself out and keeps depriving, diminishing, if you will, our personal rights and a number of other things. But without going down that route, what I wanted to do was remind everybody of the famous Bush rats ad. If you remember when Bush and Gore were squared off, there was an ad that appeared in Gore's home state of Tennessee that had the subliminal word rats pulled out of bureaucrats and bolded, but just for a quick frame flashed up on the screen. When it was discovered, and you can count that those things will be discovered, when it was discovered, the Bush people denied its presence until finally it was admitted that, yeah, we did it, and yeah, it was just a cutesy. And of course, President Bush couldn't say the word subliminal. He did subliminal. And because of that, most people laughed it off. Bottom line is, if you remember, Gore lost Tennessee. It had run heavy in Florida and a couple of other contentious states. Weinberger at Adelphi University set up a study to see if that subliminal ad, that rats ad, would influence voters. So he set up a mock election, brought in, students, gave them the similar ads that had appeared, and indeed the data shows conclusively that rat subliminal message influenced the outcome of the election. And that's, the use of this kind of thing is not novel in politics. Joel Weinberger's work at Adelphi U in New York confirming the rats ad is also not alone. I mean, the Learning Channel flashed Obama's face following Progressive insurance ads during his first campaign, subliminally. The McCain ad, took the word change and blacked it out to read hang, with a front script of it reading higher taxes subliminally. KMSP, a Fox affiliate in Minneapolis, St. Paul, showed Obama's face in the background during a sex offender story. And I could go on. I mean, Senator Bob Beers, a Republican from Las Vegas, Nevada, obtained a cease and desist order over a subliminal insertion of a gun to the head in an ad about his support for teachers carrying guns. David Wilk of Politico rightly questioned why the New York Times crossword puzzles had so many Obama solutions, since this kind of repeated exposure has been shown to influence brand choices,
Yeah, and this is what I was just going to say, this is what I would call the red pill. And once you're awake to this stuff, you just see it everywhere. And that's what I'm experiencing. I mean, I see it everywhere. Super Bowl commercials, I caught them. I rather than watch the Super Bowl, I was more interested in the commercials. And I'm telling my wife, look, see, did you see that? And then I'd go back online and show her. It's like, right here, look, this is what they're doing.
Right. And it's, it's important that we become aware of these things. You know, drop the naivety. People want to sell us product. Billions and billions and billions of dollars, like I say, are spent annually on neuromarketing techniques and technology, so that, you know, whether it's a platform, a political platform, or it's a product itself, it's the ads that are done are not done by accident. These big national ads, lots of money go into them. They are designed very specifically to motivate us, and they very often are full of subliminal messages. You know, you might find money when you get a close-up on some of these hamburger commercials, and you'll see that they've actually embedded money in that hamburger. So it looks like you're going to be rewarded with, you know, here's dollar bills, and on and on. I think if there's anything a person should be aware of, it's our limitation. We generally tend to think that we are much smarter than we really are. We have all kinds of biases. We have context biases. Well, instead of me just going through a list, let me give you some examples, because let's take the red pill. In fact, a NASA scientist friend of mine said exactly that about my book, Mind Programming. Take the red pill if you want to wake up. Take the white pill and avoid this book if you don't. But the fact of the matter is, context, that's where I was. Definitions we talked about. If you think about the saliva in your mouth for a minute, I know, Michael, to you the saliva is important because you can't talk without it. And if I ask you to give it a rating, you probably score it pretty high. It's an 8, 9, 10 on a 10 scale. Mine is, at least. And if you ask an audience, and I've done this many times, to think about their saliva for a minute, reminding that, of course, when you think about it, you actually increase the amount of saliva in your mouth. So it's okay to go ahead and swallow. And I point that out because that's a typical suggestion technique that a hypnotist might use to make you think that he's taking control of your body, that he's actually got a little bit of control. And it's just a standard suggestibility technique. So, but you come back to the saliva. I give my saliva a 9, 10. Now, if you imagine that you've just got a little shot glass in front of you and you deposit some of that saliva into that shot glass and I ask you to drink it back, all of a sudden, the spit in that shot glass becomes vile.
Yeah.
It's not the 9 or 10 in my mouth. It's absolutely vile. And when I do this with a live audience, you'll hear just, there's just these, oh, you're kidding. There's just these horrible kinds of responses like, that's the most vile thing you can possibly imagine, drinking your own spit. Okay?
Yeah.
What's that all about? It's about the context. It's how we have defined things. Well, now think about it. How does that limit my thinking? Does it limit my thinking? Well, of course it does. One of the things that we do in behavioral science is we set up studies to look at how this impinges on our thinking and on our behavior. And one such study, you might walk in and there would be 2 tables, and these 2 tables are set apart by maybe 8 feet. 2 round tables, and on one of the tables you'll have a hammer and nails, and on the other table, just a clean surface. And hanging above the tables will be 2 ropes. Your job is to connect those ropes, to tie them together. And you can reach up and take a hold of the one, but when you start walking toward the other one, you can see that you can't quite reach it. And it doesn't matter which table you're at, you're short trying to reach them. You're not short a lot, but you're short a couple of feet. You can't get that rope there. And when we watch people, they may, spend a minute looking at, the hammer and the nail and then say, I don't know, I have no clue. And that's because we define a hammer as something we pound with. If we think of that hammer as a pendulum and we tie it on the rope, and we swing one rope toward the other, and then we walk over and pick up the rope. With the swinging rope coming at us, we can easily grab them and tie them together. So it absolutely confounds the way we think about things, our ability to solve problems. Now remember, I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg here, just a couple of isolated, I hope easy to understand examples. But it goes still further than that. We operate with biases. You know, we have a bias that I think of as the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. In fact, that's what it's called. Think of it this way. If we had somebody with a gun and, you know, this Texas sharpshooter, he's got his 6 gun, and we say, you know, shoot that barn. Just shoot the side of that barn. I just want you to shoot it, a couple of 100 times. And then when he's all done shooting, we were to go over and examine the barn, and we find a lot of holes tight together. If we drew a circle around them, it would look like we really had a sharpshooter, because all of those holes were within that circle, that tight circle that we just drew, you know? Well, think of this. The way people think goes something like this. Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy were both presidents of the United States. They were elected 100 years apart. Both were shot and killed by assassins who were known by 3 names with 15 letters. John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald. And, you know, neither killer would make it to trial. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. They were both killed on a Friday while sitting next to their wives. Lincoln in the Ford Theater, Kennedy in a Lincoln made by Ford. And both men were succeeded by a man named Johnson. Andrew for Lincoln and Lyndon for Kennedy. Wow. Andrew was born in 1808 and Lyndon in 1908. Now, a lot of folks at this point are going to say, wow, what are the odds? This has got to be connected. You know, maybe I need to go back to the writings of Nostradamus, because he must have prophesied it. Okay? The fact of the matter is we're gonna overlook all the things that make it different. You know, we are drawing our circle around the similarities, the holes, and we said, wow, you see? Well, we also have confirmation bias. You know, things happen in our lives, and, you know, we're looking to confirm it. It's kind of like, well, here, real life. A few years ago, I got into collector cars. And for whatever reason, you know, I'm going to kill my parents when, you know, I see them on the other side, because, you know, they start you with these silly little box cars as a kid. And then you're filling up the holes in this case, and you just got to have another box car. Well, you know, difference between men and boys. We know that story, don't we, Mike?
Yes, we do.
So here I am. I've got these collector cars. Well, there are not many collector cars around until I start buying collector cars. And all of a sudden, I see collector cars everywhere. Everywhere, you know? You decide you're going to buy a new car. You buy that car, and then you start looking. Everybody's driving a car like your car. The nature of our confirmation bias is, what we do is we take the patterns in our life to confirm what we want out of life. So, you know, we're thinking about making a decision regarding something that we want, and just then we get a fortune cookie and it says, you know, you deserve to enjoy. Get that something special. We say, wow, that's a sign from the gods. And we go out and we act accordingly. We also have this propensity for hindsight bias. You know, you join someone for dinner and they're a few minutes late, and they arrive and they say, gee, I'm sorry I was late. You know, I got really tied up in traffic. And you say, yeah, I kind of figured that. You didn't figure that at all. You're just filling in that space. Now, you know, all of this comes down to how your mind is operating. So when you're standing in front of an authority, your doctor, in fact, a few years ago I ran an oncology study, and we had an interdiction. It happened to be this InterTalk technology, and it was just designed to see if we couldn't, improve the quality of life for patients with cancer, perhaps interdict the course of the cancer, and it'd be wonderful if there were remission. But and we enlisted a number of physicians to participate in the study, and we kept the data in a 3-year increment. So, we did our pre, and then we got our post information 3 years later. When the information came in, it broke out in a couple of categories. Now, this was a small pilot study, but it's still meaningful. One category was every single person who had stated in the pre-test information that they believed the mind had a role in wellness, and whose physician reported the mind had a role in wellness, every single one of them was in remission. That was incredible. That was remarkable. But the one that disturbed me, Michael, contrasting that, every single patient whose physician reported the mind had no role in wellness was deceased. And I thought, what is this? Some kind of iatrogenic effect? I mean, we didn't have a protocol for how the physician handed out this take-home modality. So maybe the physician that didn't believe the mind had a role in wellness was simply saying, well, there's nothing I can do. You're going to die, but hey, I'm in this program. I'm going to give you this tape. You take it home and play it. It may help you feel better for the remaining period. I mean, I don't know what they said. And maybe the one that the physician that supported the idea of the mind and wellness, he may have said something like, hey, miracles happen. The mind is incredibly powerful. You take this program, work with a little bit, see if it doesn't help you feel better. I mean, we have remissions reported all the time. Believe in yourself. I don't know what they told, but what I do know is how this data broke out. Well, that really disturbed me for a long time until I saw this study. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging again, we now know that the area of the brain that discriminates, that makes those hard choices, literally turns off in the presence of an authority. Period. Shuts down. You're standing there talking to your doctor and he says you're going to die. It's, you're not going to discriminate. You're just simply going to walk that out.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. When we understand these things, however, we can take the measures. I see my physician. He starts to tell me things. I say, let me remind you, Doug, about this study. So let's talk about the alternatives. And, I'm not going to buy this one altogether, you see. So the fact is we can use our cortical process to stop all these automatic things from going on. But how do we stop them if we don't know that they're going on? Exactly. How do we stop them if we just go on blindly intaking whatever information we intake from wherever we get it? All the deficiency commercials telling me that I'm not good enough, all those posters and banners and billboards and sound bites, and never examine them critically. If I don't tune into your show or shows like your show, I don't get educated. I just simply out there repeating what I've already heard and arguing as though, with the same vehemence that I might have if I were really intelligent about what it is I'm talking about.
Amen. We've got a call, Doctor. We've got Dr. Michael Nuccitelli on the line. Mr. Nuccitelli, welcome aboard.
Oh, okay. Good evening, Michael. Good evening to LMN listeners. Dr. Taylor.
Please, yes.
I have never, ever been so honored and impressed to listen to you tonight. The first thing I have to say is, obviously not to you, but to your web designer. When you go to your website, and obviously today in the information age, everything that we see online is, whether you want to go Jungian saying symbolic representation of a person, but whoever designs your site needs to change it, because clearly the stuff you are talking about has got me in awe. I am trained as a clinical psychologist, forensic psychologist, and 3 years ago I developed a construct called iPredator that attempts to address what's going on in the information age as it relates to, you could call it the dark side of human consciousness, aka iPredator. And iPredator has the 7 typologies: cyberbullying, cyberstalking, online sexual predation. So basically, it presents a global concept of the dark side. So I spent my entire life these days where I used to be a practicing psychologist, used to be a forensic psychologist. Now I am doing my darndest to try to develop what I call cyber criminal psychology, which is trying to understand whatever's going on as we live in the information age. But I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to say thank you.
But if I may, let me congratulate you on that. I heard an earlier commercial, and I grabbed the website real quick. Like, I have not, of course, had a chance to go through it, but what you're doing is critically important. And the fact of the matter is, people become more and more vulnerable as this technology develops, and they need kinds of services that you make available, period. And
well, I am in awe of you, Doc. Please, this is not about me. What you're presenting is what I need to know is, where do I find more Dr. T? I mean, I am so impressed by what you're talking about this evening. And quite frankly, and I'll be honest, I spoke to Mr. Vera before the show, a couple hours, and he was running late. I was kind of busy, and I had told him I had been to your website, and I was like, well, he's going to talk about the 10 scrolls. He's going to talk about this. He's going to talk about, the talk technology. Now that I've listened to you, I am completely wrong to what I thought, and you are just absolutely incredible in presenting stuff that, I wish I knew, but I'm in awe in what you're talking about, is all I can say.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity while you're on the phone, by way of my website. The website is soft, and I'm sure you saw that. But I get very few opportunities to actually talk to someone like Michael, who is not pandering to one side or another, if you will, who, for all intent and purposes, it's one thing. I love to talk about the power of the mind. I love to talk about, the power of placebo, and all the things that, that are potential within the human condition, including savantry. But I rarely get the opportunity to talk about the kinds of things Michael and I have been talking about. And so I'm going to tell you this now. My best-selling book is a book called Mind Programming, and I'm going to see that you get a copy of it. It's complimentary from me. But I'm also going to ask you this. I have a new one that is called We the Sheeple, and it is all about everything that we have been talking about today. I would love for you to look at that book, and if you feel so inclined, to give me a blurb that could be the kind of thing we use on the cover or in publicity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, whatever. I am a confirmed, not to get hokey because I'm not a religious man, I am a confirmed Taylor disciple, because as I said, and Michael will attest, I thought you were going to be a soft guest. No disrespect,
Sure, I understand, yeah.
But after listening to you, within 20 minutes after you started, I was like, dear God, I know nothing. Very rarely do I hear on the radio, internet radio, someone such as yourself that is presenting something that is just deeper than I can even imagine. And when I feel utter humility, almost to the point where I feel stunats, as the Guineas say, is I'm in awe, and I thank you. But I have one question, and to let you get back, may I ask?
Okay. I'm very honored by your compliments. And yes,
thank you.
Ask me anything you want.
Well, the construct of iPredator, it's now been, 2.5 to 3, the forensic examiners, the American College of Forensic, God bless them, they published it by the grace of God about 3 months ago. I don't know if you ever heard of Stanton Same Now, actually wrote me a very brief email. I woke up one Sunday morning, and the first thing is an email from Stanton Same Now saying, "Dear Dr. Nuccitelli, just finished reading your construct. Very informational, well put together, and congratulations." For the listeners, Stanton Same Now was the doctor who wrote Inside the Criminal Mind back in 1984. Right. That being said, what I'm still, and it's going to take me a lifetime, hopefully before I drop dead I can figure it out. Doctor, there seems to be something that is different in the information age with information technology, and I can't figure it out to where, let's assume pre-information age, you had television, you had, let's just say television, and you had the dark side, you had rape, you had serial murder, you had robbery, you had all the typical trappings of the human condition. But what it seems now, because of the veil of anonymity and cyberspace, and I don't know if it's because of technology or I don't know. I feel that society, not to sound fatalistic, it feels as if, and what I'm seeing is that not that it's causal, it's correlative, that the information age and technology is creating a disconnection effect where we're disconnecting from one another to where that little black box, that smartphone, that mobile device, cyberspace, is causing people to disconnect. And what I'm seeing is, and this kind of goes into what you're talking, is that deception in cyberspace seems to me almost like, forgive my French, like all of us take a piss every day. It seems that's what's going on in cyberspace, that everybody is engaging in deception. And my question is, do you have any sense or any feeling that why, if that is going on, why that would be going on?
Yeah, and the answer to that is yes, I do. And let me flesh that out. But first of all, let me set a background. Everybody lies. That's just the bottom line. And most people don't realize that, but there's actually been some pretty good studies. Dan Ariely is a case in point, has run a number of studies that have shown that if you put two people together, you just introduce them, real people, forget, the couple sitting at the table in the restaurant ignoring one another while they're on their smartphones. But real people in a situation where they're going to communicate, that in the first 10 minutes, they'll lie to each other 3 times. In the first 10 minutes, they'll lie to each other 3 times. Everybody lies. What happens with a world of anonymity is we can exaggerate that. As I've already indicated, I think, the answer is a conflation, if you will, of I have the anonymity. The human nature is such that I can act out all of these things that I might otherwise sublimate. I can be a sociopath, and there is no penalty for it. Everybody, after all, does these things. We have a bit of the Lucifer effect going on. Philip Zimbardo, as you know, past president of the APA.
I was going to interrupt and say Zimbardo on the Lucifer,
Yeah, in his book, The Lucifer Effect, says something that I think is key and is the answer, or a part, as I say, in the conflation of the anonymity to what's going on, to answer your question. And he states paraphrase that, you know, we've now found that the systematic symptoms, the systematic desensitization leads to pathological symptoms that may develop in up to 1/3 of normal participants in their rational process of trying to make sense of unexplained sources of arousal. Now, we have been talking about nothing but arousal. You know, we talked about Bernays and all of the research that Bernays was involved in, designed to find ways to create arousal. We talked about magnetic resonance imaging, and we talked about, you know, what areas of the brain light up, what areas of, you know, of the reward center. When do we get this arousal, and how do we stimulate additional arousal? And of course, you know, I used the Sylvester Stallone cold blood menu, if you will, as an example of how systematically we have desensitized that state of arousal to where we need more and more and more and ever more. And so we live in a 24/7 onset of arousal. That's what it takes for us not to be bored. And yet this arousal, like the arousal...
Go ahead. If I may, Dr. Tiller, I'm with you. I'm right on. I've studied Zimbardo and listening to you. And, you know, and I'm including as part the talking heads out there right now, you know, basically surmise that up to what they're calling the disinhibition effect. You know, people become desensitized, disinhibited, you know, just like all alcohol and drugs have a disinhibition effect. Goodness, I'm a recovering drunk. I know what it means to be disinhibited. But for me, I am trying to... do you think it's possible, Doctor, that it seems to me like with the recent spree and rampage killers, we look at Elliot Rogers that just happened, we look at Adam Lanza, the Kent, we go all the way 4 years ago to the Arizona shooter, even Anders Breivik, the Norwegian spree killer, all of them, even the Colorado shooter, Holmes, all of them ultimately, so far from what I found, became isolative, where they increasingly spent more and more time by themselves. Pre-information.
Well, you know, think about it. Think about it for a second, though. I mean, the reason they're spending more and more time with themselves is they're withdrawing from society, which is a symptom of what? Depression. You know, when do you withdraw? What is a classic chronic depressed individual but someone who has isolated themselves?
Correct. Now, if I may, Doctor.
So,
and prior to the information age, and this is what, so you would say, okay, isolate whether I'm a psychopath, whether I suffer an Axis 1 depressive disorder. Pre-information age, there was still spree killing, and I mean, goodness Christ, when we look at history, there's been murder and bloodshed, God knows. But pre-information age, let's just stick with one individual, would isolate. Okay, that was pre-information age. Now, when that individual, who is either genetically, whatever, now when he or she isolates, he is not isolating by himself anymore, because now he's isolating, just like Anders Breivik and, you know, Adam Lanza, now is put in front of a computer and now engages in cyberspace. And now, to me, although he's isolated, he is now able to engage in a variety of different fantasies, not necessarily and possibly dissociative experiences. Do you think that is what I'm trying to understand, is what's going on there?
He's acting out his anger. He's acting out his frustration. Again, we're going to come back and say, look, the heightened state of arousal leads to pathological symptoms. Sociopathic tendencies is definitely a pathological symptom. Depression is a pathological symptom. Anger, to the extent that they desensitize, they fail to see another human being as having a value, as being human. They see themselves as having a right to do to these people as they need to do. You know, that's what we're seeing going on. I think we have the additional shootings we have for a combination of reasons, and they come down again to, bottom line, we're in a 24/7 state of arousal that's unidentified for most people. We're living in a cycle where it's okay to get even. We see that in our entertainment. That's sold to us like it is a meme. It's okay to get even. And the kind of violence that we're raised on today, these virtual killing machines, all of the shooter games, and again, combining with this desensitization, makes the shooting okay, makes killing another human being not really killing a human being. I know you know this. Children, 14, 15 years of age, who kill their parents are very often reporting that they didn't think they were really dead. They didn't realize what they were doing at the time they did it. Can't they reinvent? Can't they just, you know, reincarnate? Young children are very often, their thinking is that distorted from reality. When you carry that kind of desensitization into adulthood, and most of these shooters are young adults. We're not seeing too many people in their 50s, 60s, you know, 70s out there popping folks. Maybe we've got one or two in their 40s that, you know, have lost it in the work environment, but almost all of this, these are younger shooters that have been raised in this environment. And as far as I'm concerned, I believe that's what underlies it. And I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but I don't see it but getting worse. And that's just the way it is. I mean, and that's why I say, you know, we need the kind of thing that you're doing. We need people to wake up. We need people to unplug from what they're doing and get back to being human and interacting with another human being, not through their iPads or their iPhones or their smartphones or whatever else it is that they're dealing with. But indeed, we need to, you know, I saw a poster the other day, I think, that says that you used to know where everybody was by, you know, you drive by and see all the bicycles on the yard. You know, 5, 6 bicycles laying down. There was a bunch of kids inside having fun, right?
Yeah.
There's no way in the world you see that anymore. That doesn't take place, Michael. We, you know, as the good doctor pointed out, we more and more, we live with someone maybe. We might even go to dinner with someone, but we're detached from them. We live much more virtually.
Goodness, this is stuff, Michael Bissell. You got to have Dr. Taylor back on, if I may. You know, because everything just last week for the listeners. You know, all I have to say, Slender Man. I mean, 2 12-year-olds attempt to brutally stab a friend of theirs because of the Slender. And this fictitious character called Slender Man, who's in cyberspace, they were doing it to, you know, pay homage to Slender Man. To me, you know, obviously you hear these incredible stories, but the first thing I think, even before I knew when they said it on the news, Slender Man, my first thought was, okay, does he have a website? And then obviously we hear Slender Man was created in cyberspace. It was off of a contest. And that is what I'm trying to understand. These 12-year-olds, obviously, and even Michael and I talked about this, would it, you know, for a 12-year-old to actually believe that I need to stab 19 times, you know, my peer, my friend, to pay honor to Slender Man. And that is what you're talking
Slender
about.
Man has now been linked to 3 violent crimes, and you know, as you point out, it's a fictional horror creature that was created on the internet. You know, but again, you have these young people that have the inability to distinguish between the real and the virtual. And we're right back to that 12-year-old boy I told you about that had 3 pets, including his horse on RuneScape.
Oh, goodness. Well, listen, gentlemen, I'll let you go, and I just want to say thank you, Dr. Taylor. You know, anything I can do or whatever, and hopefully one day you'll have time to read my construct. But thank you. Thank you for
I have it on one of the computers right here, right now, and by golly, I will do that, and I will follow up. But you and I plan on connecting outside of the show.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Nuccitelli. I appreciate your calling. All right. And Dr. Taylor, let's take a really quick break and come back, and then I want to give the floor to you wherever you'd like to go and whatever you'd like to get out, any information. I would be more than happy.
How much longer do we have, Michael?
Well, if you want it, we have another 20 minutes.
Okay, well, I'll take it. My crew has told me we're out of here now, but that's good. I've got 20 more minutes. Have your break, and we'll do 20 more minutes.
All right, sounds great. And, you know, hit any topic in any area that we want, because we're supported by you, the listener, and not by corporations and, you know, giants, shall we say. But with that, folks, let's get back to it. My guest is Dr. Eldon Taylor, and he is Doctor. You have been fascinating tonight, and I appreciate the information that you've been giving us, because so many people, we've talked about this kind of thing before, these messages in TV, and even I believe stores, some of the bigger shopping stores use these subliminal messages in the music that they play to prevent people from stealing. And you know, and it's great to come from somebody like yourself who has studied this, and you present it in a way where people won't run away and say, conspiracy theories, you know.
Nowadays, that's kind of funny, because so many of the so-called conspiracy theories turned out not to be such a conspiracy. I think, you know, we owe Snowden a great deal of thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's funny, though, and I'm not trying to put a king's hat on here or anything, but not just myself, but other shows before me even have been telling people they're listening to your phone calls, they're watching your emails, and people used to say, "Oh, you're paranoid." And yep. I am thankful that Snowden came out with that, because now the mainstream watchers look at us and say, okay, can I have that stone back? I'm sorry for throwing it.
Well, if you're getting that, I'm surprised.
I'm not.
I still don't see the so-called mainstream media, you know, paying attention to the kind of detail that ought to be paid attention to. In fact, you know, I know for a fact that a lot of the news that we get is distraction news. It's to take our, you know, mind away from areas that, for all intent and purposes, if we were to get into the detail, you know, could lead people to being very upset with the administration and things that are going on in the world. So, you know, one of the things that I do, of course, is, you know, I lecture a lot, and in a presentation that I give, I talk about how the media, mainstream media, is orchestrated. And a lot of people don't really realize the extent to which it's orchestrated. But I've got, you know, now well over an hour of video that maybe there'll be 30 segments from 30 different television stations of all genres, ABC, NBC, you know, Fox affiliates, and on and on and on, all of them, okay? And you'll have the news broadcaster saying precisely the same thing. Exactly the same line, you know, maybe the Easter Bunny takes the bounce out of Easter this year. Maybe the Easter Bunny takes the bounce out of Easter. Men, women, exactly the same line. It is choreographed, and very much of our news is just that. But when you see it and you're watching them, you'll see that these different so-called news anchors they put a different inflection, different body language. They acted out as though they had really just invented it. They were saying it, and they were the only ones. You know, we have got all these Shakespeare actors, and they're all giving us the same line, but they're doing it differently, and they're doing it at the same time. And it doesn't matter what channel you're tuned into, you're going to get largely the same information. You know, I know that you have a concern about net neutrality right now because, for all intent and purposes, you know, it's the big companies, the Verizons and the AT&Ts, that want net neutrality because then they can have a two-step system by which you're delivered access to your internet. You can have the high speed, and that will go to the Amazons and, you know, the big players, the Microsofts and so forth. And you can have that second tier, that what they want to say is still a fast speed. It will be the slow speed. And it's not a lot different than the kind of throttling that they're being accused of doing now, with accounts that have, you know, unlimited programs, or the conflict that you see between Netflix and Verizon, where, for all intent and purposes, you know, Netflix is pointing to Verizon and saying, hey, the quality of the video is them. And, you know, they just had their deal with Comcast, and if you look at the speed, you can see that they were bent over by Comcast because if they didn't come to the deal, it would have been throttled so much that it was just so slow that if you were a Comcast customer watching Netflix, you just simply changed and went to DVDs or something else. So, of course, these larger players want this two-tier system. And then maybe, you know, we'll get a new, you know, kind of charge going in. Well, we have an administration that is essentially saying, the FCC is now directed by a former director of one of these big companies, the Verizons, the AT&Ts. He'll be the arbitrator of what happens with net neutrality. You know, that's the fox watching the chicken house, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The control over, you know, the internet, it's always been America's because we invented the internet. Well, you know, we really don't need that. That can go to some other country. And, of course, China and Russia want it very badly. But the bottom line is, if the American public, and that's the reason I bring this up, if the American public were fully informed on what this misnomer, net neutrality, and I love how they give these names that you like. You know, well, that sounds like a good idea, net neutrality, doesn't it?
Like the
you know,
Patriot Act.
You know, it's a misnomer, no question about that. But if we were totally informed on what this was, we would be really up in arms. We would be, you know, screaming to high heaven, because where we get independent news today is the internet. Where is your radio show? It's the internet. And if I want independent news, if I want to be able to look around, if I want to be able to go worldwide, I want to look at Spiegel and see what they're saying in Germany. If I want to go worldwide, I have to have the internet. And if you start controlling the internet, you start throttling the access to the internet, and we get, you know, multiple tier, we turn this over to the providers, well, we know what we're going to end up with. And it's not what we have right now. And it certainly isn't a level playing field. If the Verizons of the world can cut a deal with an Amazon, well, Amazon can afford something that the new company startup certainly can't. So access to their website will be slowed down, and that'll just kick you back over to the Amazons of the world. It's not at all in the best interest of the American public. But we don't see those kinds of issues. They're not reported in mainstream news, period. You don't have in-depth interviews of the kind you're carrying on right this minute. You know, the opportunity for a person to become informed is in part dependent upon that individual's tenacity and ambition to be informed. But it's also dependent upon the sources that are available to us. And, you know,
Well, that's right.
These are issues that should be front and center on everybody's mind. They are far more important than far more important, and I don't mean in any sense of the word to demean the contribution that Dr. Michael Nuccelli was just making, but they're far more important than Slender Man. You know, that's an important issue, true, but again, and you know, we find that the news is going to give us sensationalism. It's not going to give us what we really need to be looking at and talking about. And it's often distracting us.
That's absolutely right. And they take away the internet, and we go back to having to watch Fox and CNN, and that's what they want, because they know that people are being turned off to the fake news, and they're starting to come to shows like mine for truth. And not just me, but there's a lot of others out there who are doing good work. And they want to put a stop to that because we're waking up the population, and they don't want that.
Just think about your radio show being throttled back. I mean, you can't afford the same kind of high speed that, you know, a major network could. So, you know, if listeners are constantly having the delivery of your program go through a buffering cycle, pretty quick they just tired of that and they tune out and go somewhere else.
That's right. That's right.
You know, it's a bad deal. You know, ask Pandora. They'll tell you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm telling you, that's what I've been preaching. You're preaching to the choir. We're preaching to the listeners because.
Well, that's good. You know, and to a point that Dr. Michael Nuccelli made, and I'm not sure I'm saying his name correctly. So
yeah, you are.
I am. Okay, yep. I got lucky. Okay. You know, I was reminded during the break, and I didn't get to say, you know, Eric Hoffer, who was a part of the Frankfurt School, once said something that's really important. When we think about, you know, this 24/7 bombardment of stimuli that has us in a state of suspended arousal, and largely for reasons that we don't understand, you know, we have to add into it Hoffer's observation, and he said something like, it's when power's wedded to chronic fear that it becomes formidable. Now you think about we just talked about the diversions. You think about the amount of fear-mongering that goes on in the media that we have just called sensationalism. But, you know, it's the indirect fear-mongering. I mean, maybe we actually see bodies laid out. We're told constantly about, you know, shootings and killings and deaths and you know, all of this is laying in the background. You might think of it, I would think of it as the resting part of heightened state of arousal. If that becomes the resting part, imagine then where we're walking around at. And in that state, once again, you know, the data shows clearly that we're going to have a third of the population manifesting pathological symptoms.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing going on.
That is what we're seeing. And Doctor, we're just about out of time, and I definitely want to give you an opportunity. Any speaking engagements you may have coming up, websites, by all means, go ahead. And I've got to have you back in the future. We've just barely scratched the surface.
I'd love to join you, and I am going to reach out to you if you don't mind, Michael. You know, off the air, and
absolutely.
And you know, I love your show, and I like what you're doing. And unfortunately, I didn't really discover all of this until I did my research before getting on your show at about 5 o'clock this afternoon. So I very much would enjoy coming back again, and like I say, you know, touching bases with you off the air. And I do want to follow through with Dr. Michael Nuccelli. I like what he's done. I did use most of your break to look at his eye predator, and you know, I do think that that's a very important area, and maybe, you know, in some way we can even collaborate there. I love what he's doing. So now to answer your question, sir, I would invite everybody to go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, take a look at 2 of my books. I have over 300 books and audio programs out there. I've been a busy cat. but the two of them would be mind programming and choices and illusions. I invite you to my website, eldontaylor.com. It is a soft site, and we emphasize a lot of the positive aspects of mind programming and mind power, and maybe Mr. Barra and I will take that up in another time. And Michael, I have thoroughly enjoyed the time with you and the opportunity to discuss these things, because as I said earlier, this is not something that I usually get to talk about, and it is something that is dear to my heart and very, very important, because it is a call to wake up. And, you know, the world becomes a better world one person at a time, and some of us are messengers, and hopefully, you know, we're like a Paul Revere out there saying, hey, wake up, wake up, wake up, and that's how we're going to get that better world.
Absolutely. And the feeling's mutual. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking with you tonight, and I look forward to talking to you further sometime off the air. So thank you so much, and we'll keep you linked up on the website.
Well, thank you, Michael.
All right. You have a great night, and thank you again.
And you do the same, and thank you to everybody out there for listening.
All right. Great. Okay, everybody. That is Dr. Taylor, and he is my guest tonight. Eldon Taylor has been researching the power of the mind for the past 25 years and is considered to be an expert in the areas of hypnosis and subliminal I always have a problem with that word, subliminal communication. For over 10 years, Eldon specialized in criminalistics, where he supervised and conducted investigations and testing to detect deception. Today, Eldon is president and director of Progressive Awareness Research and Company. He has developed and patented the InnerTalk technology, which has been demonstrated by numerous universities to be effective. His website is www.eldontaylor.com, and we're going to get him on the line with us here in just a second, and we'll get this thing going. So let's do that. Let's get Eldon on with us.
Dr. Taylor.
Hi, Dr. Taylor. This is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. I want to welcome you.
Well, hello, sir. How are you?
I am great. And how are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. Looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, so am I. So am I. I want to thank you for taking time out to be with us, and we are live. So welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. It's indeed my pleasure. I've been looking over your website and your work this last week and love what you do.
Well, thank you so much. And I could say the same for you. I love what you do as well. It's, you know, when we get talking about the mind, wow, just fascinating. And, you know, it's open to all possibilities. But let's start with you first. Let's get a little background and what got you going in this direction. You've done some fantastic work.
You know, I didn't come about it straight on. I think a lot of us are probably in a position that if we look at our lives, they didn't go the way maybe we thought they'd go when we were going to college or we were teenagers. You know, I found myself, I left home when I was young, and I found myself practicing criminalistics. I have to admit that, you know, I was a pretty angry young man. I felt that I had reason to be angry, and I was upset with authority, and a very long story. But you know, today I would say I definitely had a chip on my shoulder, and so what I did is I found a socially acceptable way to act out my aggression, and that was through practicing criminalistics. So I spent my days, Michael, typically, you know, running lie detection examinations, supervising an investigation, a surveillance, conducting a forensic hypnosis session. That's what I did. And, along that process, obviously, as I was taking confessions from people, I was constantly questioning myself as to why, someone would come in and confess a crime that would put them away for life. I mean, why did they do these things in the first place? And I heard all kinds of stories. But, the stories were always, they were exaggerated rationalizations for, ill-founded reasoning or impetuous behavior, impulsive activity, and so forth. Nevertheless, I suppose you could say I was a student of the mind. And as I, worked in criminalistics, of course, I took a number of schools and courses that were all about everything from reading body language. As an examiner, one of the major problems that you deal with is what we call inconclusives. And that's just simply, look, we have a guilty person who's going to practice countermeasures. And so they've got a thumbtack in their shoe. They're going to wiggle during relevant or irrelevant questions so that when you run a zone of comparison test and you ask them, are you living in the state of Washington? And they say, yes, they move so that it distorts that answer, raising the bar by comparison to the answer they give you in irrelevant. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they can be trained in these kinds of countermeasures, and even if you see them as an examiner, you can tell them, sit still, I'm going to have to ask you that again, we're going to have to start the test over, da-da-da-da-da. But as long as they maintain that kind of movement, you end up with an inconclusive, frustrated and an inconclusive. You can also have a person who comes in who, because of the situational stress, is so concerned that you're going to find him guilty that they're almost guilt complex reactors. I don't believe there is a real guilt complex reactor. I'll put that out there in case there's another examiner listening. But the fact of the matter is they're going to respond very often that way. And so zone of comparison tests give you, inconclusive results. You don't have sufficient difference between your relevance and your control or your pre-stress questions to be able to say convincingly this is practicing deception or no deception is indicated. So I had heard that the Los Angeles Police Department, in preparation for the LA Olympics, had tested a subliminal program, an audio subliminal program, where what it was designed to do was cause the inmates to be the terrorists to become dehydrated. So, in a terrorist abduction scenario, many, many hours were spent on the telephone, and so this whole scenario went, they'd play this subliminal, it was masked in the sound of air conditioning or heater, white noise, and they would tell the perpetrators that they were in an infected area. And if they were to see signs of diarrhea, dehydration, they had to be moved. The whole idea was to take control of the situation, okay? I heard that they had literally tested it on cadets in the academy and dehydrated those cadets in 3 days. They had to terminate this experiment. I've never been able to get that confirmed, nor have I been able to find that it was, denied. But it launched me into looking into, okay, what is this? How does this subliminal stuff work? What can it do? And, I made several inquiries. I called people that supposedly made these programs and asked them how they did it. And Michael, you would have thought I was asking for the secret recipe to Coca-Cola. They would say, we have science. And when I looked at their science, it wasn't science on what they did. It was almost always visual science. It was, the work of other people like Silverman, I should say, at New York State University. It was work that would have involved some visual presentation, like a tachykoscope, okay? So what I did is I just went out and I bought up a bunch of these programs made by these people, and I sent them off to audio forensic laboratories in Los Angeles, and I said, Anthony, tell me how these folks are doing what they're doing and what's on them. So Anthony came back to me and he said, Eldon, I have taken these things apart and there's nothing on them. Well, I since learned that one of the practices at that time, these people would mask affirmation statements 50 dB beneath the primary carrier. In fact, I received an engineer's affidavit after the company had been approached by an attorney general's office out of Texas. And in that affidavit, he said he masked at 50 dB. Well, now, 50 dB is beneath the theoretical limit of most stereos. So in other words, I mean, it may as well be a whisper said, in China while you're walking down the street in New York. It's simply not going to affect you except maybe whatever placebo effect you might get out of it. So that sent me to the University of Utah, where I searched through the libraries and the databases, med files, Medline, psych abstracts, looking for what I could find. And what I did is I came up with an idea of how we could dichotically mask and deliver information that was there. It was audible, but because of how the brain processes information, it would go unnoticed. It would be like the conversations that go on at a party in the background when you're intently having a conversation with another person. You just simply don't hear them, It would be like the radio turned down on low volume and you're driving down the highway and there's a little bit of wind noise and you've forgotten the radio's on, but you start to hum this song and think, I'll turn the radio on. You reach over and goodness, that's the song that's on. You just picked it up, you see. So I developed this technology, which later became patented and known as Intertalk. But the process, the whole reason was, if I could employ this in my lie detection business, I could minimize inconclusives. It was just a matter of, okay, here's the technology, but now what do I say to these people? All of the research I looked at basically was, it was finding efficacy with messages like the symbiotic, it's okay to do better than daddy, mommy and I are one. And I didn't think that would work. So I ended up using the 23rd Psalm and a message, the truth shall set you free. Well, I'm going to tell you what, it worked. It worked very, very well. Our inconclusives almost disappeared, and our confession rates increased. And I shared this with other agencies, and first thing you know, we had a number of agencies along the Wasatch Front that were employing it until the county attorney informed us it was probably not a good idea without informed consent. But at that point, Michael, a friend of mine at Utah State Prison came to me and said, Eldon, if this works so well in your lie detection practice, do you think we could use it in the prison to rehabilitate the inmate population? Maybe, even interrupt the recidivity rate. Well, I didn't know. So Lee Liston, this was a fellow at the prison system, and I decided we'd set this study up, but we needed a good stat man, so we got Dr. Charles McCusker involved. And we used the very latest, greatest psychometrics, and computer delivered those, the MMPI, to determine what we might put on a program for this inmate population that would interrupt recidivity rates, would lower hostility and aggression, et cetera, and so forth. There was the turn in my career, Michael, because when we ran the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, for those of you who are not familiar with that particular test, it's the most extensive form of personality inventory. We didn't find anything we didn't know. We had high scores in self-alienation, high scores in social alienation. And so what we had was an inmate who had low self-esteem who compensated for that simply by, if I'm not any good, you're not any good, by acting it out against society. When, however, we sat and talked to him, I learned something that was my own epiphany. These inmates essentially failed to take responsibility for their activity. They all had stories, it's not my fault, all but for the grace of God, there go you. My daddy was an alcoholic, my mommy was a prostitute, the neighbor boy mainlined me when I was 12 years old. I mean, look, given that set of circumstances, what would you do? Hey, he did this to me, so I retaliated. I mean, he dissed me. Wouldn't you do the same thing? Yeah. I mean, it was always a rationalization, a justification for the behavior. There was no such thing as taking responsibility. It was always a matter of displacing the responsibility by way of blame. And when we saw that pattern, it became clear to me that the only way we were going to interrupt recidivity rates, and listen, you know, prison systems, you probably already know this. I've seen some of the posts that you have on your website, so I'm sure you don't. But prison systems generally tend to help our criminal environment, our inmate population, become better criminals.
Yeah.
They don't work as we would like them to. And so if we could really interrupt the recidivity rate, if we could somehow, you know, facilitate returning an inmate population to the general population as rehabilitated individuals, well, that would be a big deal. Now, I'm going to tell you, I wasn't at that time. I'm probably still not what we think of as a bleeding heart. I didn't have really high hopes that this would work. But again, as we talked to these inmates, thought, how can I undo that? I mean, what kind of messages? And we finally settled on 3. I forgive myself, I forgive all others, I am forgiven. And then we put some strong self-esteem messages in as well. Now, the whole idea behind the forgiveness, and you can imagine that there was, you know, this was back in the early 80s, there was, you know, some feet dragging about that because, you know, look, if the inmate forgives himself, isn't he just going to go do it again? But no, see, the whole idea was this. The only way you're going to undo blame is to prevent that inmate from castigating someone else and making them responsible for his actions, his or her actions. And the only way you can do that is through forgiveness. So we put this program together, and indeed, we saw hostility and aggression reduce dramatically pre- and post-test. In fact, the data was so robust, Michael, that the Utah State Prison installed voluntary libraries throughout, from the minimum security 288 facility, youth offenders facility, where we conducted this study, by the way, with participants' full awareness of what the study was. They all volunteered. It was a double blind, the first of its kind in a prison. We had our placebo group, we had a control group, and we had the experimental group. So we really had hard data that we could compare. That data was so robust, the prison system installed it throughout, as I say, from youth offenders to maximum security. It was cloned out to other prison systems, and indeed, a couple of months ago, I was doing a show with a radio host, and when I mentioned this, because she'd asked me, she said, yeah, I was at Chowchilla at the time when we adopted it and took it in there as well. This was a female facility in California. So, but here's the epiphany. I discovered at that moment, at that very moment, that I wasn't any different than that inmate, except that I had found the socially acceptable way to act out my hostility and aggression. I had, and I don't say this with any. I say this, I guess, with shame. That's, I was looking for another way, but I could look on some of the things I had done and some of the ways perhaps I had, you know, intentionally hurt someone, cuffing them, and realize that, you know, in handwriting analysis to neuro-linguistic programming, pacing, mirroring, and so forth. And in that, from that sense, I understood how we established rapport and how we pulled out a confession, and many of my peers would have said I was the best. Indeed, I suppose a crown jewel in that part of my career, I was asked to demonstrate psychological stress evaluator, which is a form of no-wire lie detection, in Sandy Gilmore's Take Two live 10 o'clock television show. And the prior week, he'd had a polygraphist on from the Utah State University, and he'd attempted to demonstrate it and been unsuccessful, and of course argued, well, the reason I was unsuccessful at finding deception was because there was no real jeopardy. There was no real crime. Fair enough, but insufficient for me. So when Sandy Gilmore asked me to demonstrate the PSE, I happily agreed and caught him in his lie. And, so you could say there are many people that would say I was very, very good at what I did.
And there's really I mean, it's a gift, isn't it, to be able to do that? Because I'm very interested in this type of work. When you talk about criminality and lie detector tests and the way people give off, I guess, body language when you're talking to them or asking them about something. And so did you actually do the interviews with people?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thousands of them. I'm not exaggerating. And I'm going to tell you this, Michael. When you're when you're in that room and you're getting your lie detection test, there's going to be a piece of equipment that is not a lot more than a very sophisticated form of biofeedback. Now, today it might be functional magnetic resonance imaging, watching your brain. It could be computerized polygraph. Whatever the device is, it is going to be a form of measurement to how your physiology responds. That's what we're talking about, okay? Mm-hmm. Originally, it was something as simple as, galvanic skin response, blood pressure, upper lower pneumo belts, looking at your breathing, and so forth. But now here's the fact, Michael. When you're in that room, the lie detector is not the equipment. It's the examiner. The examiner is your real lie detector. And it's the examiner that brings jeopardy to the room. It puts meaning in the jeopardy that's involved. It's the examiner that makes the test valid or invalid.
I see. That would make a lot of sense. Now, how easy, or I should say, how hard is it? Because I know of a guy who had to take 4 lie detector tests. His story had to do with ETs. I don't want to get out there on you, but and he passed them. And I would assume it's not easy to pass these tests if you're really lying, right?
Well, I have taught, law enforcement people countermeasures techniques for lie detection. One countermeasures technique is really hypnosis. In fact, one of the courses that I took that taught countermeasures was taught by Professor Carl Lepreche, and he put himself in wide-eyed, pardon?
Oh, no, I didn't say anything. I'm listening.
Okay. He put himself in wide-eyed hypnosis, had 2 officers, in a full-body catalepsy, and had 2 officers suspending his head on the back of one chair, his feet on the back of another chair, to demonstrate how hypnosis could control physiology. Actually, this is a good segue into how I got to doing what I was doing.
Okay.
You see,